The bitter January wind howled through the back alley of Redemption Creek, Colorado, as Victoria Sutton's trembling fingers dug through the remnants of yesterday's refuse, hoping to find anything that might quiet the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. 3 months a widow, and the world had already forgotten her existence. Victoria's once fine calico dress hung in tatters around her gaunt frame, offering little protection against the harsh winter of 1883. Only 22 years old, she had already endured more hardship than most faced in a lifetime. The gold fever that had lured her husband Jeremiah west had claimed his life in a mine collapse, leaving Victoria alone in a town where she knew no one and had nothing. "Please," she whispered to no one as her fingers brushed against a half-rotted potato. It wasn't much, but it was something. Victoria clutched it to her chest like treasure, tears freezing on her hollow cheeks. She didn't hear the approaching footsteps until a shadow fell across her. Startled, Victoria looked up, expecting to see the owner of the general store come to chase her away again. Instead, she found herself staring into the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen. "Madam," the stranger said, his voice deep and gentle, "you shouldn't be out in this cold." He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His clothes marked him as a cowboy, dusty boots, worn denim, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. But it was the kindness in his expression that made Victoria's heart stutter. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice cracking from disuse and thirst. The man's gaze moved from her face to the potato clutched in her dirty hands, and something in his eyes changed. Without a word, he shrugged out of his sheepskin coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The sudden warmth made Victoria gasp. "No, I cannot, you can and you will," he said firmly. Then, before she could protest further, he bent down and scooped her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. Given how little she had eaten in weeks, perhaps she didn't. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Carrying you somewhere warm," he replied simply. "Name's Cole Andrews, and I reckon you've been alone long enough, madam." Victoria wanted to fight, to maintain what little dignity she had left, but the warmth of his coat and the strength of his arms made resistance impossible. She hadn't been touched with kindness in so long that the simple human contact broke something inside her. "Victoria," she managed. "Victoria Sutton." Cole nodded as he carried her down the main street, ignoring the curious stares of townsfolk who had passed her by day after day without offering help. "Well, Mrs. Sutton, I'm taking you to the boarding house where I'm staying. Mrs. Peterson runs it. She's a good woman. She'll help get you sorted." Victoria closed her eyes, too exhausted and hungry to argue. "I cannot pay." Nobody said anything about payment. She felt the rumble of his words through his chest, solid and reassuring against her cheek. It had been so long since she'd felt safe that she hardly recognized the sensation. Mrs. Peterson turned out to be a plump, no-nonsense widow in her 50s who took one look at Victoria and immediately began issuing orders. Within an hour, Victoria found herself cleaned up, dressed in a borrowed nightgown and tucked into a narrow bed in a small but clean room with a bowl of hot stew that she had to force herself to eat slowly. When Cole came to check on her, he stood awkwardly in the doorway, hat in hand. "Why?" Victoria asked simply. "Why help me when no one else would?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. 6 years ago, I was riding through Nevada, found a man half dead from thirst. I rode past him. His jaw tightened. Always regretted that. Never found out what happened to him, but I swore I'd never walk past someone in need again. Victoria nodded, understanding more than she could express. "Thank you. Get some rest, Mrs. Sutton. We'll figure things out tomorrow." Tomorrow came with startling clarity. Victoria had forgotten what it felt like to wake up warm and with a full stomach. Mrs. Peterson brought her a simple dress, belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to Denver, and informed her that Cole had paid for a week's board in advance. "He did what?" Victoria asked, shocked. "Said it was only right. That man's got a good heart beneath all that trail dust." Mrs. Peterson gave her an appraising look. "Now, what skills do you have, girl? Can't stay in bed forever." Victoria straightened her shoulders. "I can read and write well. I can sew, cook decent enough. I worked in my father's store before I married, so I know figures." Mrs. Peterson nodded approvingly. "Good. Once you've got your strength back, we'll find you proper work. This town's growing plenty of opportunities for a woman who's willing. Cole was gone when Victoria made her way downstairs, and she felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. Mrs. Peterson explained he'd ridden out to the Double Cross Ranch where he worked, but would be back in town by week's end. True to her word, Mrs. Peterson helped Victoria secure a position at the town's small schoolhouse. The previous teacher had left suddenly, ran off with a traveling salesman. Mrs. Peterson had sniffed disapprovingly, and with Victoria's education, she was deemed suitable as a temporary replacement. Teaching gave Victoria purpose again. The modest salary wouldn't make her rich, but it meant she could pay her own way. By the time Cole returned to town 5 days later, she was standing on her own 2 feet. He found her in the schoolhouse after the children had gone home, carefully writing the next day's lessons on the blackboard. "Mrs. Sutton," he said, removing his hat as he entered. "You're looking well." Victoria turned, surprised at how pleased she was to see him. "Mr. Andrews, I have you to thank for that. Heard you're the new school teacher." "Temporary," she clarified, "until they find someone permanent." Cole leaned against one of the small desks. "Why temporary? You seem suited to it." Victoria set down the chalk and wiped her hands on her apron. "The town council made it clear they prefer their teachers unmarried. A widow is complicated." Cole frowned. "That's foolishness." "Perhaps, but I'm grateful for the opportunity, however long it lasts." She gathered her courage. "I wanted to thank you properly and to repay your kindness." "There's nothing to repay." "There is," she insisted. "You paid for my room and board. Consider it a loan then if your pride demands it." His blue eyes crinkled at the corners. "But I'd rather consider it a favor to a friend." Friend. The word warmed her in unexpected ways. "At least let me make you dinner," Victoria offered. "Mrs. Peterson has allowed me use of her kitchen." Cole hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." Dinner became a weekly tradition. Every Saturday, Cole would ride into town and Victoria would cook whatever modest meal she could afford. They would talk for hours about the children in her school, about the cattle at the ranch, about books they had read and places they had seen. Victoria learned that Cole had been orphaned young, raised by a series of reluctant relatives before striking out on his own at 16. He'd done everything from mining to driving cattle and had only recently found a permanent position at the Double Cross. "It's good land," he told her one evening in late February. "The owner, Mr. Daniels, is getting on in years, no children to leave it to. Been talking about selling shares to those of us who have proven reliable." "That sounds like a fine opportunity," Victoria said, noticing how his eyes lit up when he spoke of the land. "It could be." Cole hesitated. Victoria, it was the first time he'd used her given name, and it startled them both. "Mrs. Sutton," he corrected himself. "I was wondering if you might like to visit the ranch sometime. It's beautiful country." Victoria felt her cheeks warm. "I would like that very much." The visit happened on a crisp March Sunday. Cole arrived in town with a borrowed wagon rather than his usual horse, helping Victoria up onto the seat with careful hands. The touch lingered, both of them acutely aware of the contact. The Double Cross Ranch lay 10 miles outside of Redemption Creek, in a valley nestled between rolling hills. Spring was just beginning to touch the landscape, with tender green shoots pushing through the winter-brown grass. "It's lovely," Victoria breathed as they crested a hill that offered a view of the entire property: the sturdy main house, the barn and corrals, the vast expanse of grazing land stretching toward distant mountains. "This is my favorite spot," Cole said, helping her down from the wagon. He spread a blanket on the ground and they shared the picnic lunch Victoria had packed. "How long have you been alone, Victoria?" Cole asked suddenly. The directness of the question surprised her, but something about this place, perhaps its openness, its honesty, made prevarication seem foolish. "Jeremiah died 3 months before you found me," she answered. "We were married for 2 years before that." "Was it a good marriage?" Victoria considered the question carefully. Jeremiah was a dreamer, always chasing the next opportunity. It made for an exciting life, but not always a stable one. She plucked a blade of grass, twisting it between her fingers. "He was kind, though. I do miss that." Cole nodded, his eyes on the distant mountains. "My parents had a good marriage from what little I remember." They looked at each other like they were sharing secrets all the time. Victoria smiled at the image. That sounds wonderful. I always thought I'd have that someday. He turned to look at her directly. Never seemed to find the right person, or maybe I wasn't looking properly. The air between them changed, charged with unspoken possibility. Victoria found herself unable to look away from his gaze. Cole, a shout from the direction of the ranch broke the moment. One of the ranch hands was riding toward them, waving urgently. "Trouble," Cole said, standing quickly and helping Victoria to her feet. "I'm sorry." The trouble turned out to be a broken fence and scattered cattle, not a disaster, but enough to end their day together prematurely. As Cole drove Victoria back to town, a new tension hummed between them, made up of words unsaid and possibilities unexplored. At the boarding house, he helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist. "I'm sorry about today," he said. "Don't be, it was lovely." Victoria gathered her courage. "Perhaps we could try again." The smile that spread across his face was answer enough. Spring unfurled across the valley, bringing new life and new beginnings. Cole's visits to town became more frequent. Sometimes they would simply walk together after church on Sundays, or sit on the schoolhouse steps talking until twilight deepened into night. Victoria found herself laughing again, a sound she had thought lost forever in that trash-filled alley. And when Cole looked at her, she saw something in his eyes that made her heart race with both fear and anticipation. In late April, disaster struck. The town council announced they had hired a permanent teacher, an unmarried woman from back east with formal training who would arrive in 2 weeks' time. "What will you do?" Cole asked when Victoria gave him the news. They were sitting by the creek that gave the town its name, watching the sunset paint the water gold and crimson. "I don't know," she admitted. "Mrs. Peterson has offered to let me stay on and help with the boarding house, but the pay would be much less." Cole was quiet for a long moment. "You could leave, start fresh somewhere else." The thought sent a chill through Victoria. "I've started fresh too many times already," or, Cole said, his voice careful, measured, "you could marry me." Victoria stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" Cole took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I'm not good with fancy words, Victoria, but these past months, you've become the most important person in my life." "Cole, let me finish," he said softly. "I know it hasn't been long since you lost your husband. And I know I can't offer you much yet, but Mr. Daniels has agreed to sell me a share in the ranch. I'm building a small house of my own on the property. It's not much, but it could be a home, our home." Victoria felt tears well in her eyes. "You hardly know me." "I know enough," Cole said firmly. "I know you're strong enough to survive when most would have given up. I know you're kind enough to see the good in everyone, even in a rough cowboy who carried you out of an alley. I know I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night." Victoria's heart hammered in her chest. The proposal was sudden, unexpected, and yet somehow it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." The kiss that followed was gentle at first, then deepened with a hunger that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. "I've wanted to do that since the day I found you," Cole admitted, his forehead resting against hers. Victoria smiled. "I've wanted you to do that for almost as long." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Redemption Creek. Mrs. Peterson gave Victoria away, beaming proudly. Mr. Daniels stood as Cole's best man, declaring loudly to anyone who would listen that Cole was the finest cowboy who'd ever worked his ranch. The wedding night was a revelation. Cole's touch was gentle but sure, his patience infinite as they discovered each other. Victoria, who had known only Jeremiah's hurried lovemaking, found herself awakening to possibilities she had never imagined. "I love you," Cole whispered in the darkness, his voice raw with emotion. "I think I've loved you since I carried you out of that alley." Victoria traced the line of his jaw, marveling at how this man, this stranger who had saved her life, had become her world. "And I love you. More than I thought possible." Their life together at the Double Cross began with hard work and simple pleasures. The house Cole had built was indeed small, just 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, but Victoria filled it with wildflowers and handmade curtains. transforming it into the home she had always dreamed of. She learned to ride, to help with the cattle, to be a rancher's wife. Cole learned the comfort of coming home to a warm meal and a warmer welcome, of having someone to share both triumphs and disappointments. The first year passed in a blur of seasons. Victoria planted a garden that flourished under her care. Cole's share in the ranch increased as Mr. Daniels grew more impressed with his work ethic and natural understanding of the land. When autumn came, Victoria discovered she was with child. The news filled Cole with a mixture of joy and terror. "I never had a father to show me how it's done," he confessed one night, his hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. "And I never had a mother to show me," Victoria reminded him. "We'll learn together." Their daughter, Elizabeth, was born the following spring, a robust baby with Cole's blue eyes and Victoria's determined chin. The day of her birth, Cole rode into town and returned with Dr. Miller, Mrs. Peterson, and an elderly woman named Two Feathers who was known as the best midwife in the territory. For 14 hours, Cole paced outside their bedroom, listening to Victoria's cries with growing fear. When Two Feathers finally emerged to tell him he had a healthy daughter, Cole wept openly. "She's strong, your wife," Two Feathers told him, "and so is your daughter." Elizabeth's arrival changed their lives in ways both expected and surprising. Nights were shorter, days were fuller, and love seemed to multiply rather than divide when shared 3 ways instead of 2. "Did you ever imagine this?" Victoria asked Cole one evening as they sat on the porch of their little house, watching the sunset. Elizabeth slept peacefully in Victoria's arms, her tiny hand curled around her father's finger. Cole shook his head. "Never, not even in my wildest dreams." Victoria leaned against his shoulder. "When you found me that day, I thought I was going to die in that alley. I had given up." "I'm glad you didn't," Cole said softly. "Die or give up. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come down that particular alley on that particular day." Cole was quiet for a long moment. "I don't believe in coincidences, Victoria. I believe we were meant to find each other." The years that followed proved him right. Their family grew a son, James, arrived 2 years after Elizabeth, followed by twin girls, Sarah and Mary, 3 years later. The small house expanded along with their family, with Cole adding rooms as they were needed. The double cross prospered. When old Mr. Daniels finally passed away peacefully in his sleep, he left the ranch to Cole and 2 other longtime hands, recognizing in his will that they had become the sons he never had. Victoria never forgot where she had come from. Each winter, she organized a collection of food and clothing for those in need in Redemption Creek. The town grew and changed, but Victoria made sure no one ever had to dig through trash for a half-rotten potato. On the 10th anniversary of the day Cole had found her, they rode together to the spot where he had proposed. The children were left in Mrs. Peterson's capable hands for the day, giving them a rare moment alone. "Do you ever regret it?" Victoria asked as they spread a blanket on the same hillside where they had shared their first picnic. "Putting your coat around a half-starved widow and carrying her away," Cole's laugh was warm in the crisp autumn air. "Only every day when you burn the biscuits." Victoria swatted his arm, but she was laughing too. "Never," Cole said more seriously, pulling her close. "Not for a single moment." Victoria rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Nor I, even on the days when the twins decide to paint each other with molasses." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching hawks circle lazily in the clear blue sky. "I've been thinking," Cole said eventually, "about expanding the ranch. The Henderson property to the east is for sale. Good grazing land, a solid house. James is showing a real knack with the horses." It could be his one day. Victoria smiled. Their oldest son had indeed inherited his father's way with animals. At 8 years old, he could already ride better than most grown men. "Elizabeth wants to be a teacher," she said. "Like I was, she'll be a good one." Pride colored Cole's voice. "Smarter than both of us put together." "And twice as stubborn," Victoria added with a laugh. Cole's arms tightened around her. "We did good, didn't we? Built something real." Victoria turned in his embrace to face him. At 42, Cole's face showed the lines of a life lived outdoors, his hair beginning to silver at the temples. To Victoria, he had never been more handsome. "We built everything," she said softly, "from nothing." As the sun began to set, painting the valley in hues of gold and amber, Cole and Victoria rode back to their home, no longer the small two-room house where they had begun their life together, but a sprawling ranch house filled with laughter and love. Their children ran to greet them, Elizabeth leading the charge at 12, already showing signs of the beauty she would become. James followed more sedately, a miniature version of his father. The 7-year-old twins raced each other, as always, their matching braids flying behind them. Victoria dismounted, gathering her daughters in her arms as Cole lifted James onto his shoulders. "Was Grandma Peterson very strict?" Victoria asked. "She let us make cookies," Sarah announced. "And she told us the story again," Mary added. "What story?" Cole asked, though he already knew the answer. Elizabeth stepped forward, her blue eyes so like her father's serious. "The story of how you found Mama in the alley and carried her away. It's my favorite story." Cole's eyes met Victoria's over their children's heads, a lifetime of love and memories passing between them in a single glance. "Mine too," he said softly. "Mine too." As the family walked toward the house together, the setting sun casting long shadows across the land they had built together, Victoria thought back to that desperate woman digging through trash for a morsel of food. From the deepest despair had come the greatest joy, all because a kind-hearted cowboy had put his coat around her shoulders and carried her away. That night, after the children were asleep, Victoria and Cole sat on their porch swing, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Colorado sky. 20 years from now," Cole said, "when the children are grown with families of their own, will you still sit here with me and watch the stars?" Victoria squeezed his hand. 20 years, 30, 50, as long as we have. And in that moment, under the endless canopy of stars, Victoria knew with absolute certainty that the greatest treasure wasn't gold in the ground or cattle on the range, but the love that had found her when she was at her lowest and lifted her higher than she had ever dreamed possible.